Hi, mining community. Welcome back to another episode of the Dig Deep, the mining podcast, the show that brings you the latest insights, thought leadership, and stories from across the global mining industry. In today's show, we have Peter Bird, who is the CEO of Akora Resources, an exploration company engaged in the exploration and development of a number of iron ore prospects in Madagascar. We're going to explore the company's journey and its positioning within the evolving iron ore and broader critical minerals space, and discussing Akora's core value proposition, what sets it apart in the competitive market, and the key milestones that lies ahead as the business obviously continues to develop. We're going to take a deeper look into Peter's own career, his early foundations in mining, his experience at the highest levels of corporate and investment banking, and how that has shaped his leadership across global mining operations. And then finally, we're going to touch on some themes that underpin the industry itself, from the importance of people, culture, to mining's role as a highly technical, innovative sector that continues to support modern life when striving to meet growing environmental and community expectations. So with no further ado, let's welcome Peter to the podcast. How are you doing, Peter?
Very good, Rob. Thanks for having me on the podcast.
Yeah, appreciate your time. We've known each other for a while, and been trying to get you on the podcast for a while, and finally we're here. So, as we always start these podcasts off, I just wondered if you can, and I imagine a lot of our audience will know you or know of you, but for those that don't, because this podcast does obviously go globally, why don't you just tell us a little bit about your career from when you first got into the industry, how your career's developed, what you've been doing to obviously up to present day. So I will hand it over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Rob. So, like many people in the industry, I started in a technical discipline, originally trained as a hard rock geologist in Melbourne in Australia, and from there transitioned into straight away out of university into an operational role in gold mining in Western Australia. And that really spanned both open pit, underground and management roles, which was very much the trend in the 80s. So I actually started working in 87, which is a bit infamous from an equity market perspective. And then whilst I was working, I studied a finance, postgraduate finance discipline, which led me to be asked to get involved in the corporate finance area of a major mining company, which is Western Mining. Western Mining got taken over by BHP eventually, and transitioned from that role into an analytical role at Merrill Lynch, major investment bank, and was the gold analyst covering most of Australasia, part of Africa, and other parts of the world. So that was a great introduction for me to sort of move away from just looking at a single or a couple of operations into multiple operations in multiple jurisdictions. When I finished at Merrill, I re-entered sort of big corporate mining in the C-suite in the executive management role. And, as time passes, I've eventually ended up being in the leadership role of a number of smaller mining companies. But, I think with all of these things, you've got to keep learning, keep training, and it never stops.
So moving on, I wonder if you can just give us an overview and a snapshot of Akora Resources, and obviously your core focus within with what you're trying to achieve with the company.
Yeah, no, thank you. So Akora is an ASX listed company, AKO, and they, predating me, so I've only been there about 10 months, but predating me, they aggregated a suite of iron ore, very good quality iron ore projects in Madagascar. The leading one of that is called Becky Soper, and the reason I was attracted to it is, at the end of the day, good quality assets are hard to find, and in this portfolio, the Becky's Hope is a very good quality asset. So, in short, a PFS was completed just predating me joining the company in the early part of last calendar year, which values that particular part of the asset at just under 150 million US dollars. The company's trading at about 10 million US dollars. So there's clearly a mismatch or an arbitrage there. But the main reason probably for that is that it was not until March of this calendar year that the mining permit was granted for that project. So all of a sudden, it's moved from a concept stage to a very real project, which we're advancing now down the development and or partnering pipeline. So the capital estimate for that is about 61 million US dollars, and we've recently engaged a group called Grant Samuel out of Melbourne to assist us with the inbound interest from a number of parties wanting to be involved. I think the reason for that is that the quality of the material at Becky Soper is very good. It's very high grade, the DSO material, and is very clean with respect to deleterious elements. And as we transition as an industry into cleaner and more efficient processing, this particular project lends itself to those more modern smelter refiner type things. Iron ore is interesting too. I've been historically more heavily involved in precious and base metals, particularly copper. And we all know the copper story and its requirement in the electrification and greening revolution. But what people tend to forget is iron ore is equally important because you need to build the infrastructure. Now, whether that's a solar farm, a wind farm, more efficient buildings, and more efficient manufacturing equipment, you need steel. So I still think it's very much a critical mineral or metal, and as long as you can develop it efficiently and appropriately, you should do that. And that's the opportunity that Akora offers.
Yeah. Obviously, I wonder if you just, I suppose, expand on that, and if you can just tell us a little bit more about, I suppose, the iron ore market at the moment, its current state. I suppose it's, and you continue on from what you said, it's within the broader critical mineral landscape. Obviously, given its evolving global demand, I just want to give us an update on the iron ore market. Coming from Australia, Australia is obviously renowned, or WA is, for iron ore. I
Yeah.
just wondered where your play with Madagascar, where that comes in, where that actually fits into the iron ore market as
Yeah,
well.
sure. So I think, over the past probably couple of decades at least, maybe more, there's been, and quite rightly, a very heavy focus on the, you know, massive growth that's taken place in China with respect to iron ore, and they produce sort of circa 1 billion tons a year of material. But what has changed dramatically is the emergence of the other Asian economies, whether that be Vietnam or more particularly India. So if you look at India, its growth path for steel manufacturing is going to double to sort of approximately, I think it's 300 million tons by 2030. So everyone seems to be focusing, and if you read the narrative at the minute, everyone goes, the iron ore price is going to go backwards and down. I'm not so certain of that. I wonder whether or not it will maintain its current level at or around the $100 US a ton mark, because whilst China has slowed, other parts of the world are growing, and they're growing not aggressively, but they're growing steadily. So there's this constant demand. With respect to our project, it's a massive market. It's very much as I keep saying, a big boys game. There's Brazil, and of course, as you mentioned, Western Australia are major sources of the material. And people will have heard of Simandou, which is in West Africa. This is comparatively quite a modest project. It's very large scale for us. As I said, we've got a market cap of circa 10 million US, and the first stage project, so stage one, is worth just under $150 million to produce around 2 million tons of ore per annum for sort of that 6 to 8 year period. So in the scheme of the global market, it's very small. But with respect to the impact it has on Akora, and more importantly, longer term, the country of Madagascar, it's very significant. So the longer term vision for the project is that sitting underneath the DSO material is an exploration target of magnetite, which is very high quality, clean material of circa 500 to 1 billion tons. Now, I have to stress, we haven't done the work on that yet, but conceptually, that sort of mineralisation would support a multi-decade mine for sort of 5 or 10 million tonnes of product per annum, for a long, long period of time. So the significance of it is that it's clean. Um, that's desired in these more modern furnaces and mills. That's the way the industry is going. So we're more than happy to be a small contributor as a blend material or as a primary feedstock material to those sort of markets. Because we've now announced that we have the mining permit, which is a significant move, there's clearly quite a lot of interest in the project from all sort of corners of the market because, whilst there's lots of iron ore around, there's not a lot of really, really good quality iron ore around. So, it's nice to have some quality material.
This episode is sponsored by Mining International. In today's market, finding the right mining talent isn't easy. Mining International works closely with mining companies to identify and secure senior and technical professionals through a tailored search approach. If you're hiring or exploring your options, you can contact Rob Tyson via the show notes to start a conversation today.
Yeah. What would you say your key value proposition is for Akora Resources, and I suppose what differentiates it from some of the other iron ore producers, maybe not necessarily the larger players, but some of the more
Yeah,
mid-tier
it's
players.
a good question. So one of the difficulties that small mining companies have when they're moving from exploration into production, which is where we are at, is that it's sometimes very difficult to fund the project because the capital piece is many-fold larger than the market capitalization of the company. So when you're doing a debt equity mix to fund the project, it's too big a bump to get over. Where I think so part of the value proposition where we're quite blessed is that if we only had the magnetite project, it'd be some hundreds of millions of dollars to develop. And as I said, we're capitalized at sort of circa 10 million US or 14 million Aussie thereabouts. But we're blessed because what we're calling the enabler or the starter project is a 61 million US capital spend. So we can see a reasonably clear pathway to fund and develop that, whether that be on our own or whether we bring in an interested party to help us bear the load to get that initial project up and running. And the value proposition, as I said earlier, is it's not recognised yet just how good the project is and the value of the project in such a small company. So there's the opportunity. The opportunity is a relatively low market capitalization company with a high quality asset that's eminently deliverable. I think the other thing which is probably interesting for listeners to consider is when you're developing base metal, particularly base metal projects, but also some precious metal projects, the level of complexity and the capital allocation to both the mining piece, as in mine design, and the construction and execution of the processing facility is quite high, right? So you even need a complex plant, which are they've been well documented and done very well all around the world. But there's always an element of risk in execution of that. In the case of Becky Soper, the mining piece is incredibly simple: shallow pits, rip and dig, truck and ship. It's that simple. And the processing facility is a series of screen decks and magnetic separators, which are off the shelf. So when you look at risk for execution, this is very low risk. And that's what attracted me to the project in the early stages was, your risk of execution is low and your capital cost is low, and therefore your probability of success is higher. And where you can mitigate risk, that's fantastic.
Just taking a step back, how did your sort of early career and technical training shape your approach to leadership in obviously mining today?
Yeah, no, it's interesting. I mean, and we all meet lots of people and work in lots of teams, throughout our careers. I think the one thing that I've learned over time is that the one critical element in any business, but particularly the mining business, because it's often quite isolated, is people. So, and it's not a motherhood statement. I mean, if you think about a development or an operation, you really need three things for success. You need a good quality asset, you need appropriate funding, and you need people who can execute. Now, if you think about the first two things, they're inanimate, as in they don't happen by themselves. You need something to make it happen. And the thing that makes it happen is people. And you need good quality people. And that's always a challenge, because as for those that have followed the minerals industry or the mining industry globally, you know, we do unfortunately go through a series of cycles of boom and bust. So when we go into a busy period, it's terribly difficult to access people, and they get poached and all the rest of it. And then you get the opposite occurring when things are not going so well. People get laid off, or find it difficult to maintain work, etc., etc. But it is a critical plank to success. So I started in a technical role, and then moved into more commercial head office type roles over time. But that feature doesn't change. You must have really good quality people, who are good at what they do, and also, can work in or be managed within very good team.
Yeah. Just following on from that, you mentioned mining has a bust and boom nature to it. And I guess there's many people in the industry that have maybe tried to squeeze that, where we don't have such a boom and such a bust. Try and make it a little bit more of an even playing field. I just wonder what your thoughts are on that, how you can, what our industry can do to sort of minimize those impacts. Because obviously,
Yeah,
like you said, you have these booms as we're experiencing now and going, and it will go obviously for a number of years. Is there a way to shorten these bust and booms, or try
yeah.
and eliminate it?
I think it's difficult to eliminate, only so it's an interesting anecdote. I know because it sticks in my mind. The average time that it takes to bring a copper mine into production around the world is around 17 years, and 15 to 18, something like that. And this particular project, this iron ore project that I'm involved with, has been known about for much longer than that. And 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 the issue is that the product is a bit supply inelastic, as in you can't just turn a mine on tomorrow when the demand comes on. You've got to go through the discovery, evaluation, funding, development, execution, operating process, which takes time. So one of the issues we constantly face as effectively primary producers is we've got a long timeline, but markets have a shorter timeline. And we've seen that, and I'm not going to make any political statements, but you've seen that with the gyrations in the oil price in the last 6 to 8 weeks, right, where, it's moving all over the place. And whilst oil and gas, is connected by a series of pipelines in various parts of the world, it just can't be turned on and turned off. So that's the challenge we face as an industry, is that, you could spend that time bringing a mine online and then the commodity price tanks, frankly, and it doesn't do so well, or vice versa. I think the one thing that does appear to be a trend, though, is that for those more critical commodities, and you probably would include, fossil fuels in that in the shorter term, um, the demand trend for the next 15 to 20 years is generally up, because of these parts of the world that are developing. So the critical minerals, and energy. I mean, in time, the renewables make a big contribution, but it can't make all of the contribution in the shorter term.
You've had significant, obviously, exposure, both at C-suite level and with obviously major investment banking. How has that financial and corporate experience influenced your obviously decision making with mining projects, and whether that's mining projects that you've been involved in the past, or obviously currently?
Yeah, I think it's interesting. I would call myself a bit of a jack of all trades, so know a bit about everything, but no master of none. But having said that, it's super important to have when you're looking at your teams or looking at the people you're working with, is to not ignore what you don't know, or put it a different way, recognize the skills you require for success. So you can't all be mining engineers, or you can't all be accountants or geologists. You have to have, the full complement of skill sets to help with your decision making. And I think, Rob, in answer to your question, you really need to appreciate that you need a whole suite of good disciplines to ensure success. And no individual has all of them. So you've got to have your eyes and ears open to saying, well, we're deficient in this area. We need help with whatever that skill might be, whether it's community, whether it's environment, or technical engineering, doesn't matter. So I think the answer to your question is recognizing you need a full complement to mitigate risk and ensure success.
Obviously, having led mining companies across obviously different regions, what has been some of the key lessons from your obviously global experience, particularly when operating in diverse jurisdictions?
Yeah, I think we're very fortunate, in jurisdictions such as Australia and, well, b- more generally, more developed nations, that we've got very high standards about how we operate. And I think the other takeaway is that when you're involved in mining, you're often, and this may well be the explorers in the first stage, but you're a first mover. So you'll be the first person or group in a region, a province, a country, and you have to conduct yourself in a very high quality manner and treat everyone with respect and be thoughtful about how you integrate and operate with those people. And then if something's discovered, you transition into an operational role and the comment remains the same. You have a responsibility to interact with more than just shareholders in your company, but stakeholders in all sort of walks of life, whether that be government, community, environmental groups. It doesn't matter. And then the last stage of the journey is when, because the thing that is a feature of our industry is every asset is finite. Eventually it ends. Unlike, it's like agriculture, which is continually regenerating, for example. So I think, in the sort of closing down phase, or the final phase, you also have to do that in a manner that is very responsible and cognizant of, the legacy you leave. Now, we all know that the industry, there are stories of where that hasn't gone so well, but I think the other thing is the industry works so hard to get it right, and I'm very passionate about that. I think we've got to get it right all the time, and all those sort of three broad steps, because that's the way you should do it responsibly. If we're transitioning as a people into a more renewable, sustainable, life, we have to try and do that as well as we can.
Obviously, you've spoken about people being central to success. How do you build strong teams and cultures in what is obviously a highly technical and often challenging industry?
Yeah, I think there's probably a couple of things. You've got to be a very good listener, and be cognizant of, because everyone has strengths and weaknesses, um, and try and get your team to work together as well as possible. And I think most of the time, with good open communication and, having the ability to admit when you or someone else has made a mistake, is a really strong thing to do. But don't dwell on it, because you can't change what's happened. Just, take the information, be open about it, and move forward with a plan and a strategy to improve. What you can't do is live in a silo. There's no good being hypercritical. You really must just take an open approach and have some conviction, by the way, in what you're doing, rather than, be indecisive. And 90% of the time you'll be successful.
Wondered if you could obviously tell us a little bit about Madagascar as a mining jurisdiction, obviously working in country. I guess a lot of our audience are from all over the world and may have not necessarily heard too much about Madagascar, but I just wonder if you can just tell us a little bit what the country's like as a country and also as a mining jurisdiction.
Yeah, sure. Well, Madagascar is, for those that don't know, is the large island off the um, east coast of mainland Africa. Capital being Antananarivo, population circa 26 million people. Predominant language is Malagasy and French, and as a lot of parts of the world, English is becoming quite prevalent. There are a couple of larger mining operations in country. There's the Ambatovi nickel project, which is owned predominantly by Sumitomo, and the QMM Minsands project by Rio, and then there's a number of other small things. Um, the next biggest or most significant project is ours, and because, as I touched upon, whilst the starter project is small, I think it will be a multi sort of decade project. From a political point of view, there was a change in government that took place in about September of last calendar year. So there's a change in government. A new government has been put in place. And a totally apolitical comment, but the comment I would make is that the new government is very progressive and keen to further the quality of life and just general quality of the country through a whole suite of initiatives. And of course, mining is just one of those. So, I think that should be applauded. I think they're taking a great approach. And from, in our little world, in Akora's world, we put our application in for our mining permit to move from exploration to mining in the latter part of last calendar year in November. There's a specifically legislated timeline for the government to review that process, subject to us providing the correct data, and that work was completed on time by the government, and with us contributing. So, I would say that it's a very progressive place. Great people. It's a developing country, and we see that all around the world. But yeah, it's a good spot.
And lastly, what's the outlook over the sort of next 6 to 12 months for Core Resources, and any particular milestones that you actually want to achieve? And also, if there's anything else you'd like to share with our audience.
Yeah, so for Akora, the key milestones, as I've touched upon during the talk, it's a major. So PFS completed with a clear valuation of just under 150 million. That was last year, US dollars. But really, you don't have a project in inverted commas until you move from an exploration phase to a development phase, and one of the critical planks of that is your mining permit. So that's been granted. What that's meant is we've now moved from, if you like, desktop to a more operational thought process. So we're looking at the funding exercise to get on and build this project. It's an 18-month build timeline once the funding's in place, and an 18-month payback. We're using, I might have mentioned earlier, but we're using Grant Samuel to assist us in that process, and part of that involves engagement from incoming interest from potential strategic partners or off-takers. So I think the things you'll be looking out for is funding and BFS milestones over the next 6 months towards the end of the calendar year.
Great. Peter, really appreciate time. Thank you for coming on the podcast, sharing your story. Obviously, give us an overview of Akora Resources, what Madagascar is like as a mining jurisdiction and as a country, and some of your wisdom around, obviously, people and the capital markets. If our audience wants to reach out to you, if they want to follow the story, which hopefully they do, and want to get news updates, how can they go about doing that? And what social media platform channels are you on?
Yeah, so we use all the LinkedIn, X, all that sort of thing. Websites, clearly the Akora website, ASX code AKO, so listed on the ASX only. And if people are really interested, more than happy to engage with them.
Yeah, we'll include all those in the show notes accompanying this podcast. So for easy access, and hopefully they will reach out to you with some questions, and obviously follow the story and news releases that the company puts out there. So really appreciate your time. Thank you for coming on the podcast, and hopefully you can come on either later this year or next year and give us an update.
Yeah, love to. And Rob, thanks so much for allowing me to talk. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, no worries. Thank you for listening. Hope you enjoyed the episode. Obviously, we were speaking about iron ore and also Madagascar, and off memory, after doing 600 plus episodes, I'm not sure if we've spoken about Madagascar as a mining jurisdiction. So please keep sharing these episodes to obviously colleagues that are in the industry, colleagues that you work with, colleagues that you may have worked with in the past, that either in or either in iron ore, other commodities, and obviously other jurisdictions around the world. So thank you again. And until next time, happy mining.